Hi, Sharon.
Hello. Hi, Sarah.
Hi, thank you for joining us.
Of
It's such
course.
an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for speaking to our community today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Great. So hello, everybody on Facebook Live and on Zoom. My name is Sarah Levin, and I'm the Executive Director of JIMENA, Jews Indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. I want to thank you all for being here today. And of course, as we always do at every one of these learning sessions, I want to just send you all wishes for health. I hope that you and your families are safe and healthy during this very strange and troubling time. I want to disclose to you that this meeting is being recorded and it will be available on JIMENA's website, www.jimena.org, and it will also be available on our Facebook page. So for those of you who don't know who we are, JIMENA is a Jewish nonprofit organization based in San Francisco, California. Our mission is to achieve universal recognition for the heritage and history of the 1 million Jewish refugees from the Middle East and North Africa. Our programs were created to ensure that the stories of Mizrachi and Sephardic Jews is incorporated into mainstream Jewish and Middle Eastern narratives in order to create a balance in attitudes, narratives, and discourse about modern Middle Eastern refugees and the modern contemporary Jewish experience. We operate through an education and engagement initiative and through an advocacy program. So through this period of social distancing, we're leading many different types of online web-based programs. This talk today, or this discussion today, is actually part of a larger series featuring top Iranian Jewish women who are experts in their respective fields. So the web address for JIMENA is in the top of the chat box, so you can just click on it to link to our website and learn more. Today, we are so lucky. I'm so honored to have Dr. Sharon Nazarian join us for a conversation on anti-Semitism. Sharon is an amazing woman, and she holds numerous positions, so many that I actually don't know if I should go through all of them. So I'm just going to cover a couple of them. So she is the president of the YNS Nazarian Family Foundation, and I think the role that I have the most respect and regard for, aside from her current work at the Anti-Defamation League, is that she's the founder of the Unison Soraya Nazarian Center for Israel Studies at University of California in Los Angeles, UCLA. She is also the chair of the advisory board. The center is housed in the International Institute at UCLA in order to provide a systemic and academic study of Israel. She also teaches at UCLA as an adjunct professor in the Department of Political Science. So I think that is actually like a perfect framing. Your credentials as an Israel advocate are very, not advocate, but as an academic and as a scholar of Israel is first and foremost, I think, the most important way to frame this conversation. So there's no question that you are a part of Israel in many different regards. So in 2017, the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL, appointed Sharon as Senior Vice President of International Affairs. Sharon heads the Anti-Defamation League work fighting anti-Semitism and racial hatred globally, and also oversees the ADL's Israel office. This is a huge position, perhaps one of the most important positions within an American-based Jewish institution. So because of that important work, this really truly becomes even more of an honor for us that you've taken time away to talk today. In order to keep this an orderly conversation, we are going to keep this in webinar mode. So you are all automatically muted. With that in mind, I hope that you all have a lot of questions and that you'll type them into the chat box. And in the end of the conversation, we'll go through and read some of them. And feel free to introduce yourselves, write your name, let us know where you are. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, I'm sorry that you can't write the questions and you can't introduce yourself on Zoom, but feel free to do so in Facebook. Okay, Sharon, thank you again for being here today. So I think a good place to start is to talk about your background a little bit. This conversation is part of a larger series highlighting Iranian Jewish women who are experts in their respective fields. We led a Shabbat with Galit Dardashti, who's an amazing, she holds multiple roles too, but I think of her as like a paitan. She's an ethnomusicologist and an expert of Iranian and Mizrachi music. You come to us as an expert in international relations, political science, anti-Semitism, civil rights. The common denominator that's shared between you and the other panelists is that you all are Iranian Jewish women, and you may have different stories, but they're all set against this backdrop of being part of a very old, a very tight-knit, and a very, very important Jewish community from Iran. So can you just talk a little bit about your family history, but specifically within the context of what Jimena is focused on, which is the story of Jews from the Middle East and North Africa?
Absolutely. First of all, Sarah, thank you so much. And thanks to Jimena, who I'm such a huge fan of the organization, for having me. It's really an honor and pleasure for me to be here. And from day one that I learned about Jimena's work, it just inspired me and empowered me and energized me as an Iranian woman to know that there is an organization out there every day, 24/7, thinking about not only documenting our history, but also educating about it. So I think it's just such an important organization. So thank you for everything that you all do every day. I'm really appreciative of it. My family story is one of, in some ways, very typical Iranian Jews and Mizrachi Jews, but one maybe a little bit different as well. I was born in Iran, Tehran, to a very Zionist family. My father had come to Israel right after the independence and kind of was formed as a young man in Israel. He went to the army, he started working in Israel, and then came back to Iran right at the time of the oil boom and started his career in Iran. So our home was very much a Zionist and very Israel-friendly home where we was always immersed into our lives. The 79 revolution also catapulted kind of Israel in a different way to our lives because we had to leave Iran feeling unsafe. And because of the work my dad had done with Israel, my dad was a businessman. He worked with a lot of Israeli companies who were engaged in Iran, in the Iranian economy. So we left because we felt threatened because of our connection with Israel. And we were lucky enough to have grandparents who lived in Tel Aviv at the time. We had a home to run away to. And we stayed there for about a year. And so I was very much formed by that 1 year of life in Israel, even though we had been going every summer. But that 1 year was a very formative year for me because I found my freedom in Israel. You know, having come from a life in Tehran where I went to a Jewish day school. I was not allowed to play on the street with our neighborhood kids in a way that I think many American kids do. Came from a very, very small bubble in Tehran that was protected and a lot of fear in our daily lives, to life in Tel Aviv where I could take the bus as a 10-year-old. I could go to school, walk to my school by myself. So for me, it was very formative. And from then we came to Los Angeles in 1979 because of my dad's considerations, mostly having to do with kind of his ability to restart our family business and get our feet on the ground again. And so the last 40 years in Los Angeles, our life has always been so deeply connected with our Jewishness and our Israel identity. The path has been one that it kind of makes sense. I think in Los Angeles, if you think about the pro-Israel community of Los Angeles, the Iranian community is at the forefront. I mean, we show up in ways that are really tremendous. I know the consulate always loves the fact that the Jewish Iranian community is really there for them at every point. So my path to this position, though, was one that really brought me from 3 different buckets of life that I was in. You know, you mentioned my academic work. After I got my PhD, I started teaching. But very soon, I kind of saw what was happening on US campuses when it came to the Israel narrative. I realized, like so many of us did, that what was changing on US campuses was kind of shift from Israel being seen as kind of this small, mighty country that's resilient, that's kind of experienced all these hurdles, to now an oppressor, to one that's the military might in the region and kind of imposing its strength on Palestinians. So my only answer to that was really education, and that's why I established a center at UCLA. I thought it was very important, beside advocacy, which is important, education in a systematic way, where in the classroom, day in and day out, you're looking at Israel as a normal country, just like all other countries in the world. That's why the center is also sitting in the International Institute, because that's where all the area studies happens. It's a normal country like any other, like Mexico and Japan, and we have to understand it from economic, political, sociological ways. So that was also a very important part of kind of my identity career-wise in academia. The second one was philanthropy. You mentioned our family foundation. I established a foundation with my parents. I still continue to run it. And again, that brought together a lot of our pro-Israel work. A lot of our giving is in Israel. It's 50% Israel, 50% US. And so it was a second bucket of my work that really formed me. And then finally, probably the last bucket is really foreign policy. I'm very interested in US relations with countries around the world. I attended and participated in many fact-finding missions to countries like Afghanistan, like North Korea, like Iraq, like Cuba, and trying to kind of formulate what US position vis-a-vis troublesome areas of the world need to be. So foreign policy is also another space that I'm very active in. I'm a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and some of these foreign policy bodies. When this position became available at ADL, and for those of you not familiar with ADL, ADL is a 107-year-old Jewish civil rights organization. It's one of the oldest and largest American Jewish organizations. But from 1913, our mission was to fight against the defamation against Jewish people, but also to secure and just free treatment for all. So from the very beginning, our founders understood that in order to fight anti-Semitism in America, we also had to speak up for all other vulnerable communities. And this has been in our DNA from day one. And so today, our work really kind of permeates all of major American cities. We have 25 offices across the US. I am personally in charge of all our international work. So everything outside the US is really my responsibility. And we have one office in Jerusalem. Now I have a small team starting in Berlin. So we're expanding our work in Europe. But my team's work is really twofold. One is to look at the needs of Jewish communities around the world. And two, how do we partner with governments, with NGOs to also bring our programmatic work? So how could ADL's best practices or know-how support, influence, and facilitate the lives of Jews around the world? And when our CEO, Jonathan Greenblatt, really tapped me for this position, he told me, he said, Sharon, you're going to be the first Mizrachi woman at a major, at the C-level, at the executive level of any major Jewish organization. I am doing that, he said to me, very thoughtfully and very in a considered manner. And I think it's so important for us as major American Jewish organizations to think about the diversity around our executive teams. And so you are the one that I really am tapping for that. In addition to the fact that you come from diaspora Jewry, you understand the mindset of what it is to be a small Jewish community sitting either in Ecuador or in Brussels or in Cape Town. So the fact that my mindset, my upbringing helped inform me when we talk about Jewish issues and when we talk about anti-Semitism and hate was really an asset in his viewpoint, and I think correctly so. So these are all my multiple identities that kind of brought me to this position today. I'll take a pause. I've given you a lot there to see if you want to follow up.
So I think that one thing that distinguishes Mizrachi Jews who fled the Middle East and North Africa in the 60s and 70s is their deep, deep understanding of what anti-Zionism, the term anti-Zionism is, and the impact and the effect that it can have on an entire population of Jews. Zionism was a crime in most countries throughout the Middle East, and it was used as a pretext to oppress Jews. And even if a Jew wasn't a self-identified Zionist and had no connection to Israel, they could easily be accused of being a Zionist and put in prison or expelled. And those same things could happen to their family members. This is certainly true in Iran. And I'm wondering if you want to elaborate on that and what that means today, because we see sort of a similar manifestation of this happening. And also you personally, as an Iranian Jew, how, if this is forefront for you in your work in the ADL and your understanding of anti-Semitism, both here and globally.
So, I mean, just starting with Iran specifically, we at ADL call communities, Jewish communities like the Jewish community of Iran, we call them captured communities. And these are communities like in Turkey, like in other places where really on the surface, they look like they're leading Jewish lives. They have synagogues, they have Jewish day schools, they can perform all Jewish rituals by law, and yet they have absolute no control on how they verbalize and they communicate their Jewishness if it has anything to do with Israel. So we see that even with our engagement with the community, we have to be so absolutely careful about what position we put them in, what asks we have of them, and how do we ask them to show up, given how vulnerable they are. So we at ADL are very, very careful about every piece of information we put out, thinking through the lens of, will this put these captured communities in danger? So we know Erdogan, for example, is a kind of leader that has there's so much we can say about not only his incitement of hate, not only in terms of repression of what is done to Turkey and to Turkish citizens in terms of democracy, but in so many realms. I meet with him every year around the UN General Assembly. He always gathers Jewish heads of organizations in New York. And in order to show off, look how great I'm treating our Jewish community of Turkey. And that's his kind of prison that he comes to. We have to be mindful that the communities who live there are on the front line and they pay the price. And I think the Israeli government also realizes that. Now, they have their own agenda. They have their own national interests that they have to pursue. We as an American Jewish organization, though, are extra sensitive to any community where they're vulnerable in that way. And talking about kind of anti-Zionism in general, look, what's happening in the world today, and when we talk about anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism being one form of anti-Semitism, is that, the wave of anti-Semitism is rising from the right, especially as you see it in Europe, from extreme right-wing groups, from ultranationalist groups. Those are clear. We know them. They're easy. They're self, identifying. It's growing. It's a threat. It's more violent. It's a problem. But we also kind of know what we're dealing with over there. The rise of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism from the left is much more challenging. So someone like Jeremy Corbyn, who was the head of the Labour Party in the UK, his language came from a language of anti-colonialism, anti-fascism, kind of Trotskyite, from human rights, what they call human rights kind of a language. And that's much more challenging in some ways. And they're not violent, thankfully, so far. So how do you grapple with that? How do you respond to where is it that, valid criticism of Israeli policy, which we all do. We all criticize American policy, we criticize American policy. Where does it step over the line into anti-Zionism and what we call anti-Semitism? Where are you holding that double standard of Israel? Where are you holding Israel to standards that nobody else is? So that's where ADL comes in, and we delineate those moments where Jeremy Corbyn's statement about, Hamas as being a partner and a friend, we come out and say, here's what Hamas stands for, or even BDS. We talk about where are the founding members of BDS, where is their ideology, what is their ultimate mission. So it is very important not to repress speech. We are a human rights organization, and in those kind of progressive spaces, both in America and around the world, criticism of Israeli policy has to be allowed, but we also have to be very vigilant about when does that cross over to anti-Semitism. And just one more word about those captured communities and vulnerable communities. Every time there is a flare-up on the Gaza border, on the Lebanon border, guess who pays the price for that? It is those Jewish communities in the Middle East, in Latin America, in Europe, who are held responsible for Israeli policy and incursions and, God forbid, deaths. So they are the frontline communities that pay the price. And so we have to be so mindful of how this impacts their daily lives and how they have to contend with it.
Okay, I want to go back to something you mentioned, in that you're the first Mizrachi woman who's holding an executive position in a very large, important institution in North America. I know at Jimena, this is something that we internally have talked about for a long time, that unfortunately we just don't see a lot of Mizrachi, Sephardic, non-Ashkenazi Jews, especially women, hold positions of power in the Jewish community. I want to frame this from a positive place. What can Jews from the Middle East and North Africa and their descendants, Sephardic and Mizrachi Jews, bring to the table that would that is really benefiting the Jewish community and our relationship with Israel?
I think we have so much to offer. And I think sometimes our Ashkenazi colleagues don't even know what they don't know. So the perspective that we bring, and I shared some of them already, the fact that, for example, our understanding of Islam, our understanding of Islamic culture and society is so valuable, because I think, and I'm married to an Ashkenazi Argentinian, so in our home, we talk about that a lot. And, you know, my husband tells me how he was raised with the biggest threat to the community coming from a Christian Catholic community. The anti-Semitism that they face in Latin America is very much coming from a fear of Christianity and Christian beliefs. We Mizrachi Jews have an understanding that has been formed by kind of threats we faced, challenges we've had posed by Muslim society and Muslim countries. Now, again, remember, I am an executive in a civil rights organization. I fight Islamophobia every single day. So I'm very wary of narratives and language that pigeonholes or discriminates or stereotypes any group. And I fight that within my own Iranian community, and it's not easy. But I'm saying that to all of you today, that our understanding of Muslim societies as Mizrachis should help actually bring more understanding about how do we engage, how do we form coalitions, how do we form allyships with one another in the US, because we have issues that we converge on. And how do we inform our policy decisions in a way that doesn't lean towards Islamophobia and fear of this other, but more understanding? So when President Obama, when he was in the White House, he brought leaders of the Iranian community to the White House to kind of inform Iranian US policy regarding the nuclear issue of Iran. And that was such a smart way to bring diaspora community leaders and say, tell us how you look at these prisms. Look at how do you see the behavior of the Islamic Republic of Iran? How should we be responding to it? So we have assets, both as policymakers, but also as heads of Jewish community members, saying we have views that you don't really have, and here are how we can enrich it and make our work that much more impactful.
I have to say also, coming from Jimena, we do work with a lot of non-Jewish Middle Eastern groups, and we found that there's an instant trust and an instant connectivity that we have that has helped us actually bring other non-Jewish Middle Eastern communities sort of into the fold and able to connect with the larger Jewish community in a way that maybe they wouldn't have felt comfortable doing prior to being introduced through Jimena. Okay, so I want to go back a little bit to the Jewish community that's in Iran. You touched on it, but I want to go a little deeper, if that's okay with you. A lot of times on social media, specifically on Twitter, we have antagonists who are telling us the Jewish and this is true with journalists too, the Jewish community in Iran, they're wonderful. They have more peace, they're surrounded by more peace and equanimity than Israelis. The regime is treating them well. Can you talk about them and also the LGBT community and all of the minorities, all of the others who are in Iran living under the regime?
So this kind of comes from the same narrative and the same space that I was mentioning, kind of the Jeremy Corbyn camp in the UK, and more broadly, the progressive kind of extreme left global movement or global community, which is blatantly anti-Western. It is anti-capitalist often. It is kind of this, they embody kind of a Stalinist glorification of Soviet ideology, surprisingly so. So when you dwindle an anti-colonialist, right? So that's a very important part of their ideology. Journalists who revere Iran in any way are completely missing the realities on the ground in Iran today. We at ADL, I launched a task force in 2018 of researchers, advocates, and scholars on minorities in the Middle East, and a big part of it was focused on Iran. So if you look at what's happening in Iran today to religious minorities such as Baha'is, Christians, Christian converts, and LGBTQ, and let's put the Jews aside even for a minute. If you look at the number of deaths, number of arrests of Iranian citizens simply because of their faith, no respected journalist could then, depict Iran as a tolerant country. There's just no way to do that. I mean, just last week, another 12 Baha'is were arrested simply because of their faith. So this narrative of kind of depicting Iran or a country like Venezuela, I mean, it's the same kind of prism they bring to looking at these anti-Western countries and lifting them up, thinking that they're like these glorified opposition voices to the US and to Western world. So the citizens of Iran know very well today that to be a religious minority in Iran only is used as a tool by the regime. Right now, the Iranian regime is under massive economic sanctions. So the rial, the currency has completely lost all value. The economy is in like complete paralysis. And Corona has paralyzed the country, and the government has absolutely failed in its response. So what does it do? We have seen in a matter of months fires at Jewish the cemeteries, at Christian cemeteries. We saw a fire at the Esther and Mordechai mausoleum. So you see this targeted attack of religious sites as a way to distract from, as a way to bring divisiveness into society, and to distract from the economic and health realities of the country. I mean, in the middle of all this, in the middle of COVID, the Ministry of Health of Iran put on a cartoon contest showing or trying to figure out who is behind the coronavirus. And guess who was the most prominent player on this cartoon contest? Israel was behind it, the Jews were behind it. At a point where the health ministry was not even responding to the thousands and thousands of deaths, they took the time to put on a cartoon contest to see who's behind the virus, using all traditional tropes, anti-Semitic tropes like galore. So this is kind of the mindset that we're dealing with. And unfortunately, some journalists do kind of give into that because their ideology is an anti-Western ideology. And so Iran becomes a perfect embodiment of that ideology.
So we're seeing this anti-Western ideology pervade a lot of progressive spaces in the United States. Do you want to talk about that and connect it to global anti-Semitism and these bigger picture issues that you're talking about?
Look, I think it's challenging. Some of the realities coming out of the Middle East make this difficult for us, for all of us, as Jewish advocacy groups and pro-Israel advocacy groups. I can tell you that we're all kind of holding our breath about the impending annexation announcement that Prime Minister Netanyahu has said he will make in the next couple of days. July 1st is kind of when they're going to start thinking about what kind of announcement they're going to make. And we all know that, these kinds of policy decisions have ripple effects, not only, in the US, not only in the Middle East, but across the world. As I said, Jewish communities around the world know that this will impact their daily lives. In progressive spaces, this becomes that much more complicated. I can tell you for us at ADL, we are in coalition groups with all other minority communities of America. Those minority communities, we come together around questions of civil rights. Look at where we are in this country right now, this moment, with the Black Lives Movement. And we want to come together and speak with one very strong voice about institutional racism, about civil justice. But the challenge is that policies coming out of the Middle East kind of get immersed into this complication and makes it that much more complex of how do we disentangle some of these issues from one another and not let one hijack the other. The progressive movement is broad. We can't generalize about all of them, but we at ADL, our specific angle of it is watching when criticism of Israel becomes anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. That's our space. So we believe in the freedom of speech. We believe in criticism and the right to criticize Israeli policy. But the minute you step over the line and you use language and rhetoric that is considered anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist, we will call you out. And otherwise, we're there with you. Let's talk about our institutional racism. Let's talk about how societies that today are moving towards the right, are moving towards more authoritarianism, this kind of illiberal democracies that are growing in Europe as well. These are actual real issues that we should discuss. But you cannot then step into classic anti-Semitic, Jews control the world tropes that we've all so familiar with.
So then what do we do? Because right now our country is in a state of upheaval as a result of racial injustice. And Black men and women are being killed, to the horror of all Jewish people, even those who say, I cannot get behind Black Lives Matter. It's our community, our religion abhors the violence that Black men and women and children have experienced. And we've defined ourselves as anti-Zionist and as anti-racist for so long. But right now, people are really feeling alienated. They don't know what to do, and they don't know how to detangle this and how to move forward and how to be good allies in a way where they can provide value, they can provide support, and they themselves can feel safe to do so. So how is the ADL addressing this? And maybe just how do you personally feel that we should be addressing this?
I want to start kind of at the end of your question. As an Iranian Jew, I'm a mother of 3 children who are now young adults, who were born here, raised here, educated here. We have to acknowledge that these are very, very difficult times and difficult issues, even specifically for our own communities. There is a generational divide about how we even self-identify. I can tell you how many dinner conversations I've had with my children, that they see themselves as people of color. And I have always seen myself as a Middle Easterner, as a Mizrachi. But how do I self-identify? Even that question, that simple question, is thorny and challenging and, divides families. And I know that in the Iranian Jewish community, there are young men and women today who are telling their parents, I identify with the Black Lives Movement. I feel that I'm a person of color. And this language today impacts me. And I can imagine the parents and grandparents who were born in Iran or born in the Middle East say, this is not about you. This is not about you. Why are you even getting involved in this? So at the very core fundamental level of self-identification, this is already challenging. And you're seeing kind of some of those fault lines, generational, progressive, traditional fault lines right there. Coming out of that, where ADL stands today within the Jewish world is that this is a moment for us as a community to speak very loudly against racism of all sorts and acknowledging that there is institutional racism in American institutions. We at ADL have a very unique vantage point because we're a civil rights organization. Our 100-year history has been very much immersed in civil rights. We were there on Selma on the bridge. We've been there at every legal and Supreme Court decision that's been made. We've been very deeply immersed in the civil rights movement in America. We're also one that is very closely worked with law enforcement. We are one of the largest trainers of American law enforcement institutions like the FBI, like police departments, like Homeland Security, in order to educate them about implicit bias, about hate crimes, about anti-terrorism tactics. So it puts us in a very challenging position today, given the real look at institutional racism in law enforcement in the US. So on one hand, we think that we're the perfect bridge because we're a civil rights organization. How do we talk through and learn from and build out of this real conundrum that we're in, that we have to bring change? At the same time, it kind of also puts us in a place where we have to look internally at ADL and say, okay, what are we doing through our law enforcement trainings? What can we do better at this moment where these very, very painful conversations that are needed have to be had both internally in our institution, internally in our Jewish community, and wider in our society, in our cities where we are. So I think we have to come from a place of empathy. We have to come from a place of kindness and understanding and being open to learning. We just had last Thursday, part of our webinar series at ADL called Fighting Hate from Home. We had a webinar with 3 leading Black Jewish professionals who talked about their own experience at this moment. And I have to tell you, I learned so much. We have to be open to know that we don't know everything and we don't know the experiences of other, both Jews and non-Jews, it doesn't matter. But from them, to speak about, going to a board meeting, and one of them was mentioning it, and I really encourage you to all to listen to it, This was a gentleman who is a professional in the federation system and said, I would be handed coats as if I'm the coat checker. I mean, example after example of, heart-wrenching, crushing experiences. So we all have to expose ourselves to that and see that we have a role in this. And we have to do better every day by first learning and listening and then acting. And that's where we are at ADL.
I completely agree with you. I think it's so important for us to humble ourselves enough to be quiet, to listen and learn, and to admit we don't know everything and have the answers to everything. So this period of time with COVID and with what we're seeing happening with police officers and law enforcement and the racial injustice issues that our country is still embroiled in, this is a very precarious time. And I think a lot of people are feeling just the heavy weight of the world on their shoulders every single day. I'm wondering if you see areas of openness and things to be optimistic and hopeful for right now.
Look, I think I was thinking about, how can we be helpful today? And, social media today is such a social ill. It's an amplifier of hate. And we as an anti-hate organization have put so much of our energy on fighting hate. In fact, right now we have a campaign that we launched last week called Stop Hate for Profit, #StopHateForProfit, which is really targeting Facebook and encouraging large corporations to halt buying ads, paid ads from Facebook for the month of July. And we've gotten huge. I mean, it's like now it's just taken off. We've had Verizon and Honda and Coca-Cola and Lululemon. I mean, we've got all major brands now coming on board. So that's the hope. That's the hope. We all just actually got Prince Harry and Meghan signing on. This is a moment where you see different actors, different leaders understand that this is a moment in our country and we have to step up. So while social media has so many ills about it, it also can create this galvanizing effort to say we have to come together as a world community and fight against the ills that are facing our society. And online hate, I would put it up as one of the #1 ills of our society today. And so this campaign has given us a lot of energy because we've been fighting this for the last 5 years. We have a Center on Technology and Society in the Silicon Valley that's been doing this. We've been, talking with Facebook engineers for the last 5 years. How do you do product changes? How do you make sure that, you're not putting hateful content next to ads that companies have bought for? They were not responsive. So the fact that we can start this campaign along with NAACP and other civil rights organizations, say, you know what, we're going to hit your bottom line. That's positive. That's hopeful that we can be a global community and say enough is enough. We're not going to just tolerate your profit-driven motivation to really bring all the social ills into our society. So that's one. And then two, I would say around the world, Jewish communal life, there is a vibrancy to it. We talk about Europe often and Jewish life in Europe in very negative ways. I just want your audience to know that in countries like Germany and others, there is a vibrant and growing Jewish life. There's communities that are growing. Young Jews who are feeling more identified with their Jewishness, more proud of their Jewishness. And the fact that we are a global community, we can connect. And COVID enabled that. I can get into a living room of any family, in Buenos Aires or in Paris or in Sydney, Australia, and have conversations with them. So we are a true global community, and COVID has made that possible in a way that was not possible. I would have to fly, 15 hours just to get to Sydney to sit in front of the head of the, Sydney Jewish Federation. So there are things that connect us and bind us and empower us that this moment we have to be aware of. It's hard, but I think we shouldn't lose sight of some of the positive things that are going on as well.
Okay, thank you so much, Sharon. So we are going to start taking questions. So if everybody wants to type in a question and we can start going through and picking some out. I have a question for you. this is very general, but I'm hoping that we have a lot of young Mizrachi and Sephardic Jews who are watching and chiming in. Do you have any advice for how to sort of bridge this generational divide that we're kind of all experiencing right now, I think?
And believe me, it's again around my own family table. And, we have 3 generations, for if we don't do Shabbat dinners yet because we're not supposed to do that, in LA. But if we're sitting in the garden, you see it, my mom and my dad versus my children, and I'm kind of stuck in the middle. What I tell both sides, and I feel like I am really the sandwich generation in the middle, is try to, first of all, listen to one another. As we said, listening is very important. And then secondly, which is very hard, is not dismissing the other's experience. So I think for those of you who are in the younger generations out there, young leaders, know that the experience that your parents and grandparents brought with them from Middle East or from growing up here even is a valid experience. You may not agree with it, but dismissing it doesn't help conversation. And the same holds for them. They need to also understand that you were raised in America, you're born here, raised here, educated here, and the values that you were raised with do not always kind of mesh exactly with the experiences that they had in the Middle East. And so we have to also respect each other's differences. In Mizrachi culture, having differences in family is very hard to tolerate. Conflict is very hard to tolerate. I don't know about your families. We just don't do well with conflict and disagreement. It's as if like we all have to be this homogeneous, exactly same values, exactly same ideas. And it's okay to talk about, we can hold different views. Our core values are the same. We're motivated by the same intention, but our specific views, whether it's political or social or whatever, we have to be able to tolerate some of those differences with one another and not feel that that makes you the other or that you don't love each other. We love each other, but we could still learn to live with each other's different views, and that we have different experiences that have led us to those views, and we have to respect those. I don't know if that's helpful, but believe me, that's the language I'm using all the time around my family dinner table.
Okay, so the first question that somebody asked was about pink washing, and now there's this new term, Mizrachi washing. I don't know if you saw that article. Do you want to get into that at all?
Do I want to get into it? Look, I think we're all in these spaces that are very challenging. And I say, the only answer is being the authentic self that you are. Your motivation, who you are, the experience you bring to whatever issues you're immersed in. The authenticity speaks above everything else. Your authentic experience and the values you hold because of those experiences, nobody can dismiss. And nobody has the right to dismiss. So whatever intentionality they want to give to your action or your language, they can do what they want. But we are authentic and we know who we are and we know what we're motivated by. So getting into that, I think is just a rabbit hole that you'll never come out of. So just don't even go there. Yeah. That's helpful. Yeah.
There's a lot of comments. There's not too many questions. Oh, okay. So here's a question. This is actually from somebody in the Bay Area who is a member of our young adult community. So I have a question. We know that the Iranian government is one of the most racist governments in the world. Unfortunately, most people come in. So what is your message to Iranian people, and how do you convince them that that we're not different? That's what it says. That my assumption is that we're all equal.
Look, I mean, what's happening today in Iran is it's an authoritarian regime that is oppressing its own citizens every day and not providing for them. So the reality is that every day Iranian citizens are grappling with fundamental needs, both, in terms of food, in terms of safety, access to clean water. These are very fundamental issues. Are they thinking about religious minorities and their neighbor and others who are different? Maybe, maybe not. Are they vulnerable to the regime's narrative, pitting one group against the other? Yes, they are. So the people of Iran, I would say, we don't have good data, and I hate making generalizations without good data behind it. But generally speaking, because of the activists that I work with daily, who are on the ground, who are activists, who are in touch with opposition groups in Iran. There is a discontent in Iran against the regime. The regime has been there for 40 years, hung on to power, has not delivered on any of its promises when the revolution happened. And it has become embroiled in internal issues and then regional issues. So the fact that the Islamic Republic supports all these militia groups across the Middle East, spends, millions of dollars, and yet cannot feed its own people, cannot give healthcare, cannot give access to clean water, cannot give gasoline, petroleum to its own people, and yet it's shipping it off to Venezuela. I mean, the whole issue of religious minorities almost becomes secondary. There's such discontent in Iran today that the regime is not delivering for them, that the intolerance toward religious minorities is secondary. But we as outsiders can educate the global community about how this regime treats its own citizens who are of different faiths. We have to do that. And I do that when I go to the European Union and to the European Parliament and talk to European MEPs saying, you are very good about talking about the nuclear issue and how we should do this to JCPOA and engage Iran on the economy. What are you? How do you show up when they're killing or imprisoning Baha'is or Christian converts or LGBT just for the sake of their identity? And so the work is still there. We have to continue advocating and educating globally and to keep the pressure on, because the regime does respond to global pressures, no doubt.
Okay. Here's a question sort of connected. As a person with both Iranian and Israeli connections who lives in the United States of America, can you explain if you have difficulty balancing your perspectives when either country is being attacked in the United States?
Absolutely. I can tell you one of the most difficult moments for me was around the JCPOA. Remember the nuclear deal that President Obama made along with European, Russian, Chinese in order to limit Iran's nuclear capabilities. At that moment, it was my American identity, my Iranian identity, and my Israeli identity all kind of at war with each other because they were not aligned and they were not, in one page about what is the best way to limit Iran. And it was very challenging for me. And how do I show up in a way that's both authentic to me? My community, the Iranian community, were very much against JCPOA and very adamantly, and against President Obama. And I, as someone who believed in, first of all, I voted for President Obama, so that was one difficulty. I also believe that if there is a window to move these negotiations to a place that both Iran's nuclear ability will be curtailed, but also its other lethal actions. So not just a nuclear issue, but also what Iran was doing in Syria and Iraq and with Hezbollah. This decoupling of the nuclear issue from all the others was where I really kind of lost faith in the Obama administration's perspective, because they said, oh, we're only going to tackle the nuclear issue. So I'm just getting into the policy implications, but to show you that each side of me was vying for one side. And more than anything, it was Israel's security that I was most concerned with, because that was existential threat facing Israel. So how do we do this so that Israel is secure and safe? So yes, the answer is it's very hard. And there are many moments where my different identities are at odds with one another. And how do you prioritize them? And at this moment, I have to tell you, I'm an American. And wanting the safety and well-being of our American democracy is very important to me. And I don't want to lose sight of that. I'm an Israeli citizen and I love Israel and I will always stand up for it in the staunchest terms. But right now, what I'm really worried about is the future of this country. So that's where kind of I'm putting my energy right now and worried.
I think that your answer actually connects to a question I asked earlier about what contributions can Mizrachi and Middle Eastern Jews bring to the table. And I think this intersectionality and this having all of these unique identities that intersect with each other and that conflicts with each other and that create real critical thought and a deep understanding is extremely important and can be very, very beneficial in adding context, knowledge, understanding to the broader Jewish community. So I think it's great that, that you're open to talking about that. And I hope that more diverse Jews from all different backgrounds, including Black Jews, like it sounds like you guys hosted a great talk, will
Yeah.
continue elevating their voices and having their voices elevated, because it's so critically important to helping everyone else understand really complex, complicated issues. Okay, so there were a couple more questions. Okay, so what is the Anti-Defamation League doing to remove anti-Zionism and BDS from other civil rights groups' platforms?
So this is a space where we think we're uniquely positioned to help. Because we are ourselves a civil rights organization, we're an anti-hate organization. We have really great credibility with other minority communities in America. So for example, with COVID, one of the biggest campaigns that we were behind and advocating for was really fighting against the anti-Asian targeting of Asian Americans because of COVID. And so we have had a long history of speaking up and standing up for other communities. I lost my train of thought.
It's about BDS and anti-Zionism,
BDS.
all those fun things.
And then also because we believe in the First Amendment, and we've always been a staunch supporter of the freedom of speech. Again, that puts us in a very unique position to say yes, but. So with BDS, our position has always been, many, especially young people on campus and other places, find it as maybe a useful, non-violent way of political action. And they think that using economic boycotts or divestment as a very credible, again, non-violent political expression of their views. What we do at the ADL is talk about the founders of BDS. We talk about the ideology that really created this movement and its intention and end goal. And that's where the problem lies. So we are very careful to say that every single person who says, I'm pro-BDS, does not mean that they're anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist. We do not put that label easily. We don't use it like that. But we do inform and we do call out when they say we believe in the ideology of BDS, we say, then do you believe in the ideology that Jews have no right to self-determination? That Israel has to be kept, held to a different standard, that BDS movement has absolutely no interest in a two-state solution, has never said, the founding members have never said so. So when it comes to that space, we are the ones that are teasing out and being more nuanced in a world where nuance is not really welcome right now, but doesn't mean we have to give up on it. And the same goes for other, the BLM movement. We can't just use broad brushstrokes. It does not help us. And therefore, ADL is that nuanced organization that tries to tease out when, policy decisions are made that are within the realm of protected speech, and when that steps over, language that steps over into the anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist space.
So that's wonderful about nuance. And I see that we talked about this a little bit before, there's these binaries happening right now where you're, pro-Trump because you can't deal with anti-Semitism on the left, or if you're in the left, you just absolutely hate Trump. And a lot of nuance is getting lost in really important conversations. And it doesn't bode well for anyone when we when we polarize ourselves and identify so closely with these very, very extreme binaries. Do you want to talk about that at all?
I do, because that is a kind of reductionist, and it does not help our society. We have extremists that we monitor from all parts of the spectrum, political spectrum. We monitor and expose extremists on the far right. We monitor and expose extremists on the far left. And we do the same with Islamist radicalization. So kind of our Center on Extremism, and it's a really good resource for all of you to go on there. And if you really want to see where we are, whether we're talking about Antifa or we're talking about, white supremacist groups, where does ADL come down on all of that? Our perspective is about extremism and how does that play out in society and what does it lead to? And extremist ideology, by definition, is not helpful to a healthy society, wherever it comes from. And we all have to accept that. So no matter what camp you see yourself, and hopefully you won't see yourself in camps, and we're a nonpartisan organization. We don't care about, Republican or Democrat, Trump or others. That's not who we are about. We're about the infusion of extremist, hateful ideas, language into our societal spaces, and making sure that we label it, we point it out, and we fight against it. And we all have to do that with our own camps. That's the key. Whatever camp it is that you're in, it's the Jewish camp, it's the political camp, we have to start first with our own and making sure that those kind of extremist ideas don't find way and become mainstreamed. The extremist ideologies will always be there, but we have to keep them at bay at the fringes. And what's happening today, again, doesn't matter which camp, all of it is there. It's coming into the mainstream, it's coming into our daily lives and infusing it within our language, and that's the danger.
Yeah, okay. So this is from Dan in Santa Monica, who is saying hello. So he writes, in your position with the Anti-Defamation League, an important part of your job is constantly shining a light on anti-Semitism happening around the world and raising awareness. I'm curious how this constant focus on awful, horrible, oppressive events impacts you personally. How do you also breathe in peace?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, you know, I told you a little bit about my background and what brought me to ADL. Before ADL, I was a builder. I built centers. I empowered institutions through our philanthropy. It is a big change for me. I have to admit to you, it is not easy living, breathing, you know, this part of our society that's on the negative side. But I have to also tell you, I didn't share with you what really prompted me to take on this job. And the single event that got me to take on this job was what happened in Charlottesville and the march. And many of you as Mizrachis will understand, when I was watching those men with the horrible tiki torches, you know, walk through Charlottesville, I had a momentary memory come back to me that I hadn't thought about in 40 years. When I was a child in Iran, and many of you will know, on the day of the death of Prophet Ali in Tehran, in Iran, all over, there are men who come into the streets and they commemorate the death by kind of taking their shirt off, you know, top and self-flagellating. And I think as a child, I must have seen this. This was a day that we knew as Jews, you don't step out in the streets. You know, it was just a day of fear, I would say, for most minority communities in Iran. And I'm sure some of you also have experienced in other countries. So that moment, that fear of people seeing men come down the streets, you know, with blood coming out of their head must have been a traumatic memory for me because I had not thought about it in 40 years. But that day when I watched on TV, when Charlottesville happened, that memory came back and that fear came back. So it was such a moment that I knew this is a time for me to now step into the fight against anti-Semitism, because that's what my parents left Iran for. We left because we felt unsafe as a Jewish family. And we came to America knowing that this is a place where we can be safe. And to see these men say the things they did, that they said, threatened that safety that I felt. And I said, okay, then what can I do about it? And this is a moment that I say, I need to work for ADL. I need to be on the right side of history. And I need to do what I can in my own very small personal way to fight what they're trying to do to the country, that my adopted country that I love. So I think, you know, we're all an amalgamation of our experiences. For me, that was a moment that was very poignant. And since then, that's what energizes me and makes me wake up every day, is that I'm on the right side of the history, that I am doing in a very small way, impactful work to make sure that this country, my adopted country, remains safe and a place that my children and my grandchildren, hopefully in the future, will feel safe, that they don't have to get up and leave again.
Amen to that. Do you think we're safe? Because I think a lot of people are starting to wonder.
Look, I think right now, I can tell you in the Iranian Jewish community, there's a lot of fears, and I'm sure others as well, about impending gloom. We have to be very responsible as leaders, not to fearmonger. I think we have to remember that the institutions of this country are very strong, that there is democracy in this country in a way that's not just in the ballot box. And we all have to be not only invested in securing those institutions, you know, attacks on the media. These are things that are meant to almost shake the foundation of our democracy, because they're such an important part of what makes up our democratic societies. So we have to fight those every day, and we have to fight the vilification of the others every day, because that divisiveness, that's the threat. That's the threat, when we constantly feel that, oh, they're going to do this and they're going to do that to me, and that doesn't help make us more secure. What makes us safer is when this country is functioning the way it's supposed to as a democratic system and has the protections that it's afforded us. So we have to put aside our fears, if we can, in a way, to say our humanity is what keeps us safe. Our coming together and making sure that we're not going to stigmatize others. We're not going to point fingers at whole communities and say they're a threat to me.
I love that. Thank you so much, Sharon. This has been such a wonderful, wonderful learning opportunity. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with Jimena and with me. Thank you so much. And for everyone out there, this talk will be available on our website and on our Facebook page. So if you chimed in late, it's available to watch at any time. Thank you all for joining us. And I hope you all continue to stay safe and well and healthy. Sharon, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you
all.
Bye,
everybody.
Have a great day. Bye-bye.